Good morning. It's good to see you all here. If you have your Bibles, turn to Psalm 139. Psalm 139. That will be the majority of time that we spend this morning will be in that psalm. Psalm 139. It's good to be here. It's good to see you all here this morning. Last week, if you remember, don't remember, or you weren't here, we spent some time to talk about anxiety. Especially from Philippians chapter 4, the scripture reading that was read. We talked about anxiety and how God and Paul, specifically in Philippians, calls us to a life filled with no anxiety, called us away from anxiety, and a life that is full of peace, a peace that passes all understanding. And we looked at some things in that passage that can lead to a life and a mind that has less anxiety and more of peace. And we looked at some things that help with that. Today we're going to look at the same kind of topic, anxiety, but we're going to take a different approach, a different perspective. We're going to look at this Psalm 139. And its approach. And if you just want to look at the last couple of verses, so verse 23 and 24, we'll see where we're headed as we study this psalm. Let's look at verse 23 of Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there is any grievous way in me. And lead me in the way everlasting. You see David in the end of the psalm say, search me, know my anxious thoughts. A plea from David at the end of the psalm for God to know his anxious thoughts. And I think what David is trying to do through this psalm is he's trying to help himself. He's trying to work through his own anxieties, his own worries, his own cares, and find a way to deal with them. Now, what David was anxious about, I'm sure, is very different from what we are anxious about, what you're anxious about. And even the anxieties of this room, what you worry about, what you're stressed about, is probably different. Different stages of your life. You'll have different anxieties. Through counseling, I kind of hear what people are anxious about. You know, it's really funny to have the differences. So I have like a 9-year-old who has very different things that he's worried about versus, a 45-year-old or 49-year-old. He's worried about if he's going to get to play get to be on YouTube long enough. And he wants to get his YouTube in versus, the 49-year-old who's more interested in trying to, make sure the relationships last and trying to have a relationship with her daughter and trying to do a lot of these big things, trying to find a job, trying to stay employed, trying to provide for a family. Those are very different anxieties. But even if you're a 9-year-old, a 49-year-old, somewhere between, or a king of Israel, as we see here, all those anxieties are very real to each one of them. Just because the 9-year-old has different anxieties than a 49-year-old doesn't mean that his anxiety is any less than that of the 49-year-old. Each of us have different anxieties. There's different things we're stressed about, different things we're worried about, but they're all very real. And whether you're a king of Israel or you're dealing with the problems of today, I believe the answer to the anxiety is the exact same. And I think we find it here in Psalm 139. So let's go to the beginning of the psalm. And we're just going to work our way through the psalm and see how David kind of, I think, coached himself, worked through the anxiety. So Psalm 139, we'll read the first section, the first 6 verses. Psalm 139, starting in verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in, behind and before. and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, and I cannot attain it. He says at the beginning of the psalm, you've searched me and you know me. And notice that's in the past tense. This isn't, you will search me, you will know me. This is, you have searched me, you have known me. And also notice that whatever David thinks about that, it doesn't scare him. It doesn't freak him out. Because at the end of the psalm, he's going to say something very similar. He's going to say, keep searching me. Keep knowing me. Keep knowing my thoughts. It's not something to run away from. Now, depending on, I think, your standing with God, how you think your relationship with God is, you may not want him to know you. You may not want him to know your thoughts or to search you. But David, obviously, in this particular place in his life, he feels very comfortable with God knowing him. And in fact, he finds comfort from it. Notice what he says in verse 2. You know when I sit down and when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from afar. You know me better than anyone else. I mean, think of the person that you know the best, your spouse, your kids, whoever. Do you know every time they sit down, they lay down, every time they rise up? Do you have that intimate, detailed knowledge of them? Or does anyone have that detailed knowledge of you? And beyond that, he knows what you can't even see. He knows my thoughts. He knows what is going on inside my head. Which again, if you're not in the right relationship with him, that can be really freaky. But instead, I think he finds comfort in that. You know my thoughts. And in verse 4, it kind of expounds on that. You know the word that I'm about to say. And sometimes I don't even know the word I'm about to say before it happens. Sometimes it just kind of comes out, and I'm like, well, I didn't mean to say it quite like that. But he says, you know that. How much time do you have to spend with someone for you to sometimes know what someone's thinking, or sometimes know what they're going to say before they say it? How much time do you have to spend with someone? I've seen this happen, and I've had this with my wife, where I know exactly what she's thinking. Like something happens, and she's thinking, I can't believe you put mushrooms in that dish, or I can't believe that you did that. I know exactly what she's thinking, or something, questions asked, and I know exactly how she's going to answer it. But I don't know that for most people in my life, and I would guess you're the same. You don't have that intimate knowledge. It takes time and a lot of intimate time together to know the other person. And David says, you know that about me. Even from afar. Even when you seem far off, you know all of this about me. You know my life. That's what he says in verse 3. You know my life. When I search out my path, my lying down, you know where I go. You measure my traveling, and when I lie down is the literal Hebrew there. And the word, the translator, the word behind it, the commentator said that this is like a winnowing term. And it means like God, the word means to search or to measure. It has the connotation of a farmer who is winnowing his harvest. He's trying to get the most out of it. And God, he doesn't just see us in where we go, the path that we travel, but he's active in our lives trying to get the most out of us. And then look at verse 5. What image do you get from verse 5? Do you ever think that David in his life, when he was running from Saul or his sons or some enemy, or he's in a foreign nation and had no idea what to do, where he was, felt like he was lost, that he just laid down that night and went to prayer and to God and just laid out everything. And he felt that God just kind of put his hand here and his hand here and just held him close. That's kind of the image I get from Psalm 5. You hid me in, behind and before, your hand is on me. Some of the times, there are times in which God, in the midst of our anxiety and our struggle, he just hugs you. Like a father would to an anxious or distressed child. And he just holds you close. And he comforts you. That's David's image of God. And so he concludes this section by saying, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high I cannot attain. And you could take this a couple of different ways. You can take it, how can anyone have this much knowledge? How can anyone have this much knowledge about me? Even if you take all the cameras and all, the Big Brother and all the technology and everything, they can't have this much intimate detail about me. But I think what he's saying even more than that is that I don't even know myself like God knows me. God knows me better than I know myself. And it's too wonderful for me. It's high, and I can't attain it. Do you think that would help you with your anxiety? Do you think what he says here would help you with your anxiety? Look at the next section, verse 7 through 12. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where should I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take wings in the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even your hand shall lead me, your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely darkness shall cover me, the light of day about me be night. Even in the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. I don't think David is saying, I just can't get away from God. Man, if I go to heaven, he's there. If I go to the grave, which is Sheol, you are there. I just can't get away from you. He's having kind of the same attitude that Jonah did, where he just tried to go to the farthermost parts of the world to get away from God. I don't think he's saying that at all. I think he's saying, it is so comforting to me in every situation of every part of my life, no matter where I am, where I am. I could be in the far ends of the earth, in a ditch, and yet I know God is there with me. I think David understood something about God very few people in his day did, which was God was not the God of Israel alone. See, back then, they thought gods had specific domain. So the god of Babylon, his power was in Babylon. And if he was outside of, someone was outside of Babylon, oh well. You got to pray to that god, the god of Egypt, if you're in Egypt. And David understood something special about God that was far greater than any of their gods. That God was the God of everywhere. No matter where he went, God was there too. He's the God of everywhere and of everything. And the thing is, do you believe that? Even though I would say most of us don't believe in statue idols as gods, I would hope. And I would say that we don't believe in the polytheist system. I think sometimes we limit God. We say, okay, well, I don't want to pray that to God. That's too small. Or that's too big, or he doesn't handle things in that realm of my life. That's a work thing, or that's a family thing. Like, he doesn't work in that space. Do you limit God? Do you believe that God is the God of everywhere, of everything? Because one of the things that we do especially when we're anxious, is we take everything on ourselves. That's one of the things that leads to anxiety, is if I have to hold this, it is all my responsibility to keep this together. And you don't give any of that to God. David says that no matter where I am, whatever my circumstances are, God is always with me. That's what he says in verse 10. Even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. You're always with me. If you notice in Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, we covered Philippians 4 last time, but I intentionally skipped over verse 5. Because it says something very similar to this. In Philippians 4, verse 5, we'll start in verse 4. Philippians 4, starting in verse 4, if I can find it. Starting in verse 4. I rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is near, or at hand. Do not be anxious about anything. So he says, rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice. And he says, let your reasonableness or your gentleness or the way you live your life in such a way that people can see how reasonable and gentle you are. And then he says, the Lord is near. Don't be anxious. So often that we take everything on us. Anxiety is overwhelming because we think we have to handle everything in our life. And what I think Paul is saying and what I think David is saying is you're not alone. You don't have to do it by yourself. Because oftentimes we can't even see clearly. We are lost. And that's what he said, and David said in 139, verse 11 and 12. You notice that. Where he says, it seems like it's dark. It seems like it's night. I don't know the path I'm supposed to go, but you do. Even the darkness is not dark for you. It is actually light. When I have no idea what to do or where I am, you are there. And you lead me and guide me with your right hand. Do you think that this would help with anxiety? Do you think this would help with your anxious thoughts? Look at the next section. Verse 13 through 18. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and your book were written, every one of them. The days that they were formed for me, when they were yet, there were none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I still with you. David says, you've always been there for me. And he pictures God, and this is kind of the picture I get, as kind of like the older lady that's just sitting in the corner in a rocking chair, just knitting together. And it's not knitting together clothes, it's knitting together new human beings that are about to enter the world. God is there just sitting there, creating new human beings, including David, to enter the world. And he says in verse 14, I am wonderfully made. God, you made me how you wanted me to be made. Can you say that about yourself? That I am wonderfully made? That you made me just how, you made me just perfect of what I need to be. Because oftentimes we like to look at our negative side, our deficiencies of our life. what we lack in our life. And one of the sources of anxiety is fear, especially the fear of worth. That I'm not worthy of love, of respect. I'm not good. I'm not worthy of anything. Fear says that I'm not good enough. I can't do this. We focus on all the negative things and characteristics we have. Moses basically kind of went through the same thing with God. Remember when God was going to appoint Moses to lead the Israel out of Egypt, and Moses, came with all these excuses. One of them was, I can't speak. I'm not good at speaking. And you remember what God said? Who made your mouth? But notice what he says after that. Who made your mouth? Mute or seeing or blind? Who made you? And even in maybe our deficiencies, the things that we don't like about our physical appearance or their characteristics or what we like to achieve, God made you just the way you were. I know that there's a lot deeper theologically to that we don't have time to get into. But if you come from the place that God made me how he wanted me to be made, and that maybe the deficiency of my physical body, things I wish would change, maybe he designed me how he wanted me to design. And that I have to endure those things so that I become the more perfect person that I need to become. And that through that struggle, maybe I can help other people. He says, I'm wonderfully made. Do you believe that about yourself? In verse 17 through 18 just kind of struck me. Because I don't know if you ever thought about how many times God specifically thinks about you. Have you ever thought about that? How many times do you think God has specifically thought about you? Not just you as one of the 7 billion humans on this earth, but you specifically. And what David says is it's like the sand on the seashore. It's innumerable. He has thought about me so much. Individually, me. He's thought about me. I mean, if he knows my thoughts and the way I go and the things, he's thought about me a lot. That is humbling. I don't know what that does for you, but that really humbles me. That the God of all the universe thinks about me and knows me and searches me. Do you think that helps with your anxious thoughts, your anxieties? This next section, it takes a turn. Verse 19 through 22. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malice intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do I not love those who rise up against you? I hate them with a complete hatred. I count them as my enemies. It kind of takes a very violent turn there. You go through, God knows me, and he searches me, and he thinks about me, to, I hate these people. It kind of is like, okay, what's going on? And I think there's a couple of things. One, I think this could be part of the reason he has anxious thoughts to begin with, is all these wicked people here. But I think you have to make sure you're on the right side. Because if you don't hate the people that hate God, what does that say about which side you're on? And these aren't the people that are just, lackadaisical or anything like that. These are the people that actively hate God, that work against him, that loathe him. That's who these people are. Think about what emotions and what reactions you would have if someone you love, a family member, someone close to you, was treated in the same way that people treat God, that these people that God says would treat God. Think about how your emotional reaction would be. And it would be justified. And so David says, I understand these people that are hating you, and I hate them like you hate them. And I think, there's definitely a difference between what we talk about, which is God's love for everyone, and he wishes none to perish, but everyone to have everlasting life, and that's certainly true. But he can still hate the people's actions who have opposed him violently, opposed to him with everything of their being. They have intentionally determined that they are going to stand in God's way. And we need to make sure we're on the right side. Because I think one of the problems we have with sin is we don't hate it. We don't hate it. We like to see how close we can get. We flirt with it. We don't hate sin like God hates sin. But let's close this out. The last couple of verses, verse 23 and 24. Let's read those again. Search me, O God, know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. There's a couple of really interesting things here. He says, search me, know me. Why does he want God to search him and know him? Search me, because I want to be found. Know me, because I want to never be alone. Try me, test me, so I never become like the people that hate you. Know even my anxious thoughts. And I think he wants God to know his anxious thoughts because of what he says in verse 24. Verse 24, I think, kind of is the crux of this. It's a decision. There's two choices here. One, it says, and lead me in the way of everlasting. The way of everlasting, the word there is lead me in the ancient way, which how it's used in Jeremiah and several places, it means the way that was originally prescribed by God, the old way, the old law. Lead me in that way. So that's option one. Option two is what he says at the beginning of verse 24. And see if there be any grievous way in me. That word grievous is actually is just pain. See if there be any way of pain in me. You have the ancient way, God's way, the everlasting way, or the way of pain. Have you ever known someone, or have you ever been this person that has had great anxiety, great stress, great worry, great heartache in their life, and they chose the way of pain? They turned to addiction. They turned to self-harm. They turned to sin, immorality, whatever. And they turned to bad situation and made it worse. That is the way of pain. And so what David is saying here is, know me, search me, try me, know my anxious thoughts, and lead me not in the way of the pain, but in your everlasting way, the way that you prescribed in the Torah. That is the way that you should lead. Usually at the end of the sermon and this, we have an invitation in which you can, come forward. We can pray for you. If you want to make your life right, if you want to be baptized, we offer that a chance to make your life right before God. And we'll certainly do that. But there's going to be another invitation. Because the last two verses of that psalm is it David giving an invitation to God. For God to know him, to search him, to know his anxious thoughts, and see if there's any way of pain in him. And what I would like you to do as we, stand up and as we sing is you make that same invitation. You make the invitation to God for him to search you, for him to try you, for him to know you. And if there be anything in your life that would lead to the way of pain, that he get you out that way and leads you into his everlasting way. I hope every one of you make that invitation as we stand, as we sing.